Get out of my life. It's that simple. Oh, hi! Are you looking for the best gritty social realist films on Amazon Prime? Well, you came to the right place. Let's get right to it. Il Bidoni, aka The Swindlers, is a 1955 Italian neo-realist film directed by Federico Fellini. It's about a group of swindlers who use various different types of scams to get money off people. They've been doing this for quite some time, but now that some changes in their lives come around and they start to rethink and have a bit of a think about what they've been doing. Now, Fellini's mostly known for his later, more poetic, extravagant films, but I prefer the grittier ones like this, like the neo-realist films like Il Bidoni, La Strada, Nights of Cabiria. That's sort of an in-betweener. I like that one. Il Bidoni. Next up is Umberto D. Another Italian neo-realist film from the 40s, this time from the daddy of them, Vittorio De Sica, most famous for The Bicycle Thieves. He made Shoe Shine directly before, and he made Umberto D a few years after Bicycle Thieves, which I think both films are better than Bicycle Thieves. And Martin Scorsese agrees with me, so you can't argue with that. So Umberto D is the story of a nearing retirement man who's unable to work. So he's told that he's going to be forced out of his flat if he can't come up with the money. So he goes off on a sort of mission to try and find a way to raise money so he can stay living in his flat and to keep his pet dog, who could end up in a shelter or somewhere far worse. It's one of the saddest neo-realist films, and they are a sad genre. But it's so engrossing. The old man's just amazing, and the dog. How can you not feel something for a dog that's going to be thrown to the wolves? So if you're fancying a trip to Italy in the 40s, there's those films there. There's several more neo-realist films as well, but those two are probably the best to watch if you wanted to delve into that a bit.
Il pane costa caro, è vero? Poi c'è tutto il seguito, la trippa, la pasta.
So now over to the UK where the kitchen sink lives. Her first up is Sweet 16. This is a Ken Loach Paul Laverty collaboration. There's several other ones on there. Ladybird's also a really good one, but I think Sweet 16's probably, if you're not familiar with Ken Loach, it's probably the best sort of entry one because it's really more focused on the characters than the politics. Sometimes I've said many times that I think the politics of Ken Loach's films get in the way of telling the story or sort of delving into the characters. But Sweet 16 doesn't do that. It's not very political. It's about poor people, but it doesn't let that get in the way, I'd say. So it features a incredible debut performance by Martin Compston, who we now see on TV all the time. He plays a young lad in Scotland, in Greenock. He's been dabbling in casual crime and scams, and he's kind of at a crossroads where he can carry on down that road and get more serious and possibly in more trouble, or try and find some other opportunities in an area where those opportunities are scarce. So it's a very, very gritty, very realistic, often sometimes violent film, and one of Ken Loach's best because, like I said, it's just the story. It doesn't try to preach at you. Next up is The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. This is a classic from back in the day, but those sort of early angry young man films, a lot of them came from the stage. They were, for the time, they were telling stories about a different class, and it was different, but they weren't all as gritty as the later films or the sort of films that we can sort of consider gritty now. Those were still a bit showy because the acting was sort of still staged, and sometimes, like Billy Liar, there was flashbacks and stuff like that stopped it from being that great. But The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, I think, is the first really sort of hard-edged, gritty British film from that period. It follows Tom Courtenay, or you may know him as Billy Liar, as he's sent to Borstal for robbing a bakery for no real reason. That family is kind of just known as a criminal family. They're kind of tinkers, so he just feels the need to follow that through. So when he gets to Borstal, the establishment discover that he has a talent for running, so they decide that they can exploit that to their own ends and use him as some sort of prized possession, and they give him quirks and free stuff along the way in order to exploit him. So he's kind of trapped between this. He could probably succeed and get out, but he would become a part of the machine even more so than he already was. So it's a film about freedom, a very gritty film about freedom. It's well worth a watch. Next up, staying in the UK and staying in Borstals, is the Alan Clark classic Scum. We're still in the Borstals here. but a bit later on. This is towards the end. This apparently at the time brought about the end of the Borstals. Once this had been seen publicly, and what was happening in them was made public. There was uproar, and the Borstal system was eventually closed. So this story is Scum is the story of Carlin, who's been transferred from another Borstal into here with two other lads, and we sort of follow their journey of how they integrate into the Borstal environment, and they don't integrate very well, except for Carlin, who's willing to fight. And he fights his way up to the top.
I'm the daddy now. Next time off.
And gets all the quirks that are allowed of those who can fight to survive. Anyone else is just left by the wayside. So yeah, it's a gritty, uncompromising, quite horrible film about the realities of youth violence in the 70s. So check that out. London to Brighton is a more recent, very gritty film about sex trafficking, the horrors of that underworld. It follows the lives of two young women who are trying to raise enough money to get away from the pimp who's been making their life hell.
I'm Kelly's friend.
Oh, yeah?
Was she back yet?
No.
Oh, she's coming back here, though, isn't she?
It delves into some of the darkest desperation caused by modern day slavery in the UK. It's not an easy watch. So you definitely have to be in the mood if you're going to watch this one, because it is grim, unrelentlessly grim. So there's some hard hitting films there from the UK. It's quite depressing actually looking at them all. But I wouldn't suggest watching any of them too often. Maybe one a week. You know, just get your bit of grit in. Well, that's that for the UK. Now we're going to Jamaica.
You can get it if you really want.
Kingston, Jamaica, early 70s. Jimmy Cliff's character's grandmother dies and he's forced to move into Kingston to try and find work, try and find somewhere to stay. There's not a lot of work around, but it turns out he has a talent for singing, and there is a music industry there. So seeing some hope in that, he tries to enter the music industry, gets a few songs out, but it turns out he slowly finds that everything there is corrupted in a way that the poor will always lose. So no matter how talented he is, he will never get anything back from it. So it sort of leads from there into more desperate, violent situations. It's got a grim, realistic film. It was very successful at the time. It's probably the most important film from the Caribbean. And it's well worth a watch. Oh, and the soundtrack's amazing.
We're not gonna get them.
Now over to New Zealand. Bad Blood is a 1981 thriller film based on a true story, directed by Mike Newell, who went on to direct Four Weddings and a Funeral. It's based on the true story of a farmer who was growing increasingly suspicious of his neighbours for, I don't know why. He was just convinced they wanted to kill him or steal from him or whatever. And the government demanded that all firearms were handed over for the duration of the war period, and he refused, lashed out, and what ensued was an intense manhunt and several deaths. The film it treats this all very realistically and very slowly, and when the violence comes, it feels so real. It's
Just come to help.
it's really hard. It's really hard hitting film, and you also get to see a lot of beautiful shots of New Zealand, so you get a sort of little holiday with it as well. Now over to the US, The Pleasure of Being Robbed. It's the debut film from the Safdie brothers, who've had great success recently with Good Times and Uncut Gems. This was their first film though. It has the sort of gritty realism of those two films if you've seen them, but those films have a sort of crime thriller set pieces in them that kind of keeps the plot going. I mean that is the plot in those films. So this film doesn't really have that. So it's a sort of realistic film where nothing really happens. It's about a young woman living in New York who just sort of drifts around. It seems like she tries to make friends with people, and she sort of does, but she just does it to rob them for no real reason. She just likes stealing. And you just spend a few days with her as she wanders around New York, and you get to see a bit of New York, and you get a bit of character, and it's a very interesting film. Very interesting window into the lives of a sort of mid-20s social drifter in New York. That's well worth watching. Oh, and ending on a bombshell here, Bad Lieutenant. So Abel Ferrara was through the 80s was kind of the he was right at the front of New York, of documenting New York's gritty underworld, from Driller Killer, Miss 45, King of New York. But this is probably his masterpiece.
Like the old days.
Good left.
Harvey Keitel gives a performance of his career as a bent copper, hell-bent on destroying himself and everything else around him, who's offered one chance of redemption after a nun is raped, and his Catholic upbringing sort of starts to emerge and tell him that he's not a good person and probably should improve his life. Whether he does or not, you'll have to watch to find out. You will need a bath after. So that's it for now. That's the top 10 gritty films on Amazon Prime. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share if you enjoyed this video for more gritty social realist centric content. See you in a bit.